Hey, what's up guys? I'm Jeff and welcome back to the Centrist. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at the legal definitions of some key terms as they relate to the incident that happened on January 6, 2021, where hundreds of Trump supporters entered the U.S. Capitol building during the congressional certification of the 2020 election. Now, over the last 16 months, there have been ongoing investigations into that event. However, those investigations and their findings have, for the most part, been kept private, kept out of the eye of the public. But that is all about to change soon. Here in June, we're going to be having 6 congressional hearings on the January 6th, and these will be public hearings that will be televised. Originally, there was going to be 8 hearings, but seemingly that has changed since the latest information is saying that there will be 6. And in these public hearings, they're going to finally reveal what their investigations have found when it comes to this incident that happened on January 6th. We don't have an official date or time for the first hearing, so keep your eyes out for that. But I felt like with the hearings happening soon, now would be a good time for us to discuss this topic. In our extremely divided country, we can't even agree on what happened on that day. We have those on the right that are saying that it was just a riot. Some are even going further, saying that it was a mostly peaceful protest. Then you have those on the left who have told us repeatedly that it was an insurrection, that that's what happened on that day, that it was an insurrection against our government. There's quite a bit of distance between the legal definition of a riot and an insurrection, so that's just how far apart these two sides are when it comes to what happened on January 6th. So we're going to look at the legal definition of an insurrection here in the United States. What exactly do you have to do to be charged with that crime? We're also going to look at the legal definitions for 2 other terms that I've seen used quite a bit to describe what happened on that day, and that would be sedition and treason. So we will look at the legal definition for those 3 terms, those 3 crimes, and see if they fit for what happened on January 6th with our limited information that we currently have. So do keep in mind that if you're watching this in the future, that those June hearings have not yet happened, and thus we don't know what exactly the investigations will reveal. Now, the purpose of this video is to inform, not for me to be expressing my opinion about what happened on that day. Many of you guys who knew me last year when this happened already know how I feel about it. Like many Americans, I was shocked and appalled at what happened that day. I'd never expected to see something like that in the United States of America. Some of you may recall that I didn't create any content for several days because I was so involved with the discussion surrounding the event. So many of you guys know how I feel, but I want to make it clear that my personal opinion on what happened that day will not be at all involved in this video. Again, we're going to try and be very objective, just looking at the legal definitions. I'm not going to try and make it look worse than it was, and likewise, I'm not attempting to defend what happened or exonerate those that did participate in these events either. I'd also like to make it clear that there were tens of thousands of people at that protest, and most of them did not enter the Capitol building. Most of them did not assault police officers. The majority of them were just peacefully protesting. We're not talking about those individuals, though, today. The only individuals we're talking about are those who entered the Capitol building. So we're going to start this discussion by looking at riots, and we'll end it by talking about insurrection. Now, insurrection is not the most serious of these crimes that we're going to be discussing today. However, that's the one that is most frequently cited, the one that we see most often online, so we'll save that one for last. So what is a riot? Well, a riot is essentially just a protest that turns violent. So did a riot happen that day, or was it a mostly peaceful protest? I think it's pretty obvious that it was a riot. I think most people on the right would agree with that as well. There was definitely violence on that day as people assaulted police officers, pushed through barricades, broke windows, broke through doors. So I think it's unquestionable that there was violence, so therefore it would certainly fit the definition of a riot. Now, one thing to note before we move any further, while there was several people who died that day, including one woman who was shot by a police officer, there weren't any murders by the actual rioters. So I did want to make that clear because some people might not know that, because the original reporting was that the rioters killed a police officer. And that got reported pretty much everywhere and ended up being untrue. It was completely inaccurate. I think it was said that they had beat a police officer over the head with the fire extinguisher. However, that did not happen. A police officer did die, but it wasn't from an assault. The reasons why he died have not been made entirely clear. At first, they said it was because of being exposed to bear mace, and then later it was revealed that it had nothing to do with that. Almost a year and a half later, we still don't know what happened to that police officer and why he died, but it has been made pretty clear that he was not killed by the rioters, nor were any of the other individuals outside of the one woman who was shot by the police. The rest of them died due to certain health issues that happened during the event. So let's finally get into these definitions. So the first one we're going to be looking at is the definition for sedition. So sedition is often cited as something that happened that day, that the actions that took place were seditious. So we're going to look at the legal definition for sedition and see if that definition fits the actions of those involved on January 6th. Now, I should note that the crime is not called sedition. It's actually called seditious conspiracy. So seditious conspiracy. This is Title 18, U.S. Code 2384. If two or more persons in any state or territory or any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof. So that is the legal definition of sedition or seditious conspiracy. So there are actually 4 parts to this definition. So we're going to go through each one and determine if they do apply to what happened on January 6th. Though do keep in mind that only one of them have to apply for it to be considered seditious conspiracy, because it does say or in between each one of the parts. So the first one is conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government. Now, I don't think we have enough evidence right now to say that that one for sure did happen. The FBI came out rather early in the investigation, perhaps too early, and said that they had not found any evidence that there was a conspiracy to overthrow the government, that there were some individuals that had planned beforehand to go into the building, but outside of going in the building, they didn't have any additional plans. Overall, it did seem to be a more spontaneous event for most of those involved. Even those who had planned to go into the building beforehand, from what we know so far, they didn't really have any intentions to do anything beyond that. Again, our information is very limited. I think we'll learn a lot more this month in those hearings. So just based on the information we have right now, I would say we do not have evidence to suggest that there was a conspiracy to overthrow the government. So now we'll move on to the second part, which is to levy war against them, meaning the government, or to oppose by force the authority thereof. So I don't think that there was any levying of war against the government. So I think that's pretty clear that it does not fit that part of the definition. So let's go on and move on to the third part, which is to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law by force. The intention did seem to be to, at the very least, delay, if not completely stop, the certification of the 2020 election. And that is part of our law. So therefore, I think that it does qualify. The events that happened today do qualify for the third part of this definition, that they were attempting to delay, prevent, or hinder the execution of a law. And then you have the fourth and final part, which is to by force seize, take, or possess any property of the United States. And I think that would also fit what happened that day. That part of the definition does qualify. They did seize control of government property, even if only for a few hours. So I think it's clear that the actions of at least a few of those involved that day does qualify for the crime of sedition or seditious conspiracy. And that's not exactly surprising, considering the fact that there have been a couple individuals that have been charged with exactly that. Why do I say that it only fits for at least a few of those involved rather than all of those who entered the building? Is the word by force. That's a key word there. They had to try and delay or prevent the execution of the law or take or seize government property by force. and not all those who entered that building used force. So it really only would apply to those who broke a window or broke open a door or pushed their way through a barricade or assaulted a police officer who was blocking a door or something. It would apply for those individuals, but the ones who just walked into the door, particularly those who walked past a police officer and filmed themselves asking the police officer if they could walk in, and then that officer telling them yes, I don't think that those people could be charged with sedition. It's pretty clear that they did not enter the building by force. So for those individuals who used force to get into the building, January 6th was an act of sedition, which makes sense since several individuals, again, have been charged with that exact crime, but wasn't an act of treason. Now, treason is a little different than sedition or insurrection because treason is the only crime that is defined by the U.S. Constitution rather than by a law, though there is also a law that defines treason. It's also incredibly difficult to prove that somebody has committed treason, and that's one reason why so few people have been convicted with treason. Overall, I think it's only about 28, I think that's the right number, about 28 people who have been charged with treason, and of that 28, less than half of those, about 12, I think it is 12 or 13, somewhere around there, have actually been found guilty of treason in the entire history of the United States. So let's take a look at what the U.S. Constitution says about treason. So this is in Article 3, Section 3, Clause 1 of the Constitution. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. The definition of treason has also been further restricted by both Congress and the Supreme Court over the many years since the Constitution was written. Essentially, it must be proven that the individual intended to betray the United States to an enemy country and that they also committed an overt act in that attempt to betray the United States. So I think when you look at this definition, it's apparent why so few people have been charged and convicted of treason. It'd be incredibly difficult to prove that somebody committed it. I mean, first of all, you got to prove intent. It's very challenging to prove intent in the court of law. So just committing an action that hurts the United States and helps a foreign enemy is not enough for it to be treasonous. You would also have to intend for that action to help the enemy and hurt the United States. So just committing the action is not enough. Just intending to commit the action is not enough. You got to do both. It's also pretty clear that the crime of treason does not fit the events of January 6th. There was no other country involved as far as we know. They had U.S. flags out there, chanting USA, USA. Clearly, this was not about betraying the United States to another country. Again, as far as we know, maybe we'll find out differently. But as of right now, I think we can safely say that those that committed the actions on January 6th were not guilty of treason, despite what we have heard quite a bit of since the event happened. We've heard that those involved were traitors and that they committed an act of treason. Looking at the definition, again, I think it's pretty clear that that is not what happened on January 6th. So now that brings us to insurrection, the most commonly used term to describe the events of January 6th. We hear it a lot, but insurrection is one that is very rarely ever charged. In fact, I believe it's even rarer than treason, which you've seen with treason, it was only about 28 or so people that have ever been charged with it. Historically, a charge of insurrection is even more rare than treason. There's only been a few Americans in our entire history that have ever been charged with insurrection. So let's take a look at the legal definition of insurrection. So this is Title 18, U.S. Code 2383, rebellion or insurrection. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto. So this is an incredibly broad definition, therefore it may surprise you that it has been charged so rarely. And that is because there's been a few things that have been considered to have to be held true in order for it to actually be an insurrection. And the two main ones is that, first of all, it needs to be an armed conflict against the government, an armed rebellion, and secondly, that there needs to be a large amount of violence involved. So the question is, do the events of January 6th fit the legal definition for insurrection? Well, I'm not a legal expert. My degree is in political science and history, but I would say no. It doesn't seem to me to fit that definition. I don't think we saw an armed rebellion. Again, I think it was sedition. It definitely was a riot. But we didn't see anybody who was armed in this event, at least not in the building. From my knowledge, nobody who had a gun was in the building, outside of the police officers, obviously, but no protesters or rioters had any weapons in the event. In addition, we touched on this earlier in the video. For this very reason, nobody was killed by the actual rioters. This definitely wasn't a large-scale armed rebellion against the government. There wasn't that much violence. While there was some violence involved on the part of the rioters, there wasn't a lot of violence. So it doesn't fit those extra requirements. And just as far as just the legal definition, if we're only looking at that, which again, when they decide to charge somebody with insurrection, they don't only look at that. But if you just look at that, I don't think we saw a rebellion against the government, period. So I just don't think that would fit, or at least not based on what we know so far. Maybe the hearings will reveal more, and maybe we'll see that there was something else planned there that we don't yet know about. Maybe there was some type of rebellion or attempt to overthrow the government. But as of right now, I don't think we can say that that happened. It did not seem like a rebellion to me. Based on what we went over today, it was a riot for most of those involved. Those who used force and violence, that would be an act of sedition, but that would not be a rebellion. I think you'd need a lot more information and evidence to prove that this was an act of rebellion. I just don't think it applies. So when people say that that was an insurrection that happened on January 6th, as a person who knew the definition of these terms, I found it very strange over the last year and a half or so that this has been so widely labeled as an insurrection, particularly when you consider the fact that nobody's been charged with insurrection. And there's a reason for that, because it doesn't seem like they are actually guilty of insurrection. So even when we consider the fact that there may have been things found in the investigations that we don't yet know about that might be revealed in the upcoming hearings, I still don't think that there's anything that suggests that there's evidence of insurrection, considering the fact that, again, nobody's been charged with that. The government knows what they found. If they had found evidence of insurrection, you would think they'd be charging at least some of those individuals of insurrection, but that's not the case. So to conclude and wrap up what we learned today, we know that the events of January 6th absolutely were a riot, at least for several people involved, for hundreds of people involved. It was a riot. It wasn't a mostly peaceful protest. And then for those who committed any acts of violence, so attacking police officers, breaking windows, or breaking open doors to get inside the Capitol building, those individuals could be charged with sedition, or more specifically, seditious conspiracy, and several of them have been charged with that very crime. But it does not look like it's treason. It's very clear it's not treason. And it also seems pretty clear that this was not an insurrection against the US government. So what will all those people involved be charged with? We already mentioned that a couple of them have in fact been charged with seditious conspiracy, but what about the rest of those involved? Because as of right now, 846 people have been charged with some sort of crime connected with January 6th. A little over 3/4 of that 846 people charged have just been charged with what is essentially trespassing. The exact definition is entering and remaining in a restricted building or grounds. So it's essentially trespassing. That's what the majority of those 846 have been charged with, which is a misdemeanor crime. It's not very serious. A quarter of the 846 charged have already pled guilty. About 70-something of them have pled innocent but been found guilty. So there's still a lot of those charged that have not gone to trial yet. But overall, based on the information we have, when we look at that legal definition of insurrection, when we look at the charges of those involved, I think it's pretty clear that there was not an insurrection on January 6th, despite the propaganda, I suppose you would call it, misinformation maybe, the inaccurate description of that day's events. We've been told a lot since that day that that's what happened, that it was an insurrection, but it seems pretty clear that that's not what happened. We'll see if that remains the case as these hearings take place over this month. We'll have a lot of new information revealed. We'll see exactly what they discovered in their investigations. I'm certainly interested to see what will be found, particularly when it comes to Donald Trump and his administration. That's something we really didn't deal with in this video because we were only discussing the individuals involved in the actual event, because Donald Trump was not involved in the actual riot. You know, there's questions of, did he incite the riot? Was he at all responsible? How involved he was with it? Did he help plan it? What exactly did Donald Trump do and not do on that day? And those are questions that we don't really have answers for yet, but questions that might be answered in these upcoming 6 hearings, these 6 public hearings. So again, I'm very interested to find out what they're going to reveal. I don't think at the end of this that there will be evidence of insurrection. That's just my opinion here at the end of the video. I don't really know. Just based on the definition, though, what we've seen them charged so far, I really don't think insurrection is an accurate description of what happened on January 6th. Again, it was definitely a riot. For some of those involved, it was certainly an act of sedition, but it wasn't treason. It wasn't insurrection. And if the information revealed in these upcoming hearings changes our understanding of the events, maybe I'll do another video to discuss what we learned in those hearings. Perhaps it would be revealed that there was in fact an insurrection on January 6th. Maybe there will be even something worse revealed, like the involvement of Trump and his administration. We just don't know how involved he was, what he knew, what he didn't know. So maybe even something worse will be revealed. But as of right now, I think we can say that there was not an insurrection. So we're going to leave it at that. Again, we'll come back to the topic after the hearings. If they reveal anything new that should be addressed on this channel, then we will do so. But we're going to go ahead and end this video here. Hope you did find it enjoyable, helpful, informational. If you did, make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your interpretation of the events on January 6th. Obviously, I didn't share my opinion about these events. Many of you guys already know how I feel about what happened then, but I'd love to hear your opinion. But I would particularly like to hear your feedback on the content we actually covered, so these legal definitions of these 3 terms. So yeah, leave a comment down below. I do hope to see you guys on the next video, which remember will be next Friday, and thanks for watching.